My name is Engineer Benjamin Nyawade. I'm a civil engineer and a member of the Architectural Association of Kenya. I'm the chairman of the engineers chapter at the association. When you are considering to build, you need to know a few things and to have a few things. Number one, you need to know what you want to build. What is it that you want to do? Where you want to build or with the building that you want to buy. Then you need land to build on and the finances that will enable you to build on that land, whatever it is that you wish to build. In some cases, you do not have the land, but there is part of an already built building or a structure that will be built in the near future, and you think that you can take part of it for your purposes. In that case, what you'll need is you need to know what you want and the finances to enable you acquire that part of the building. If you are building on your own land or land that you have acquired, you will need to involve professionals who by their training know exactly how to enable you to use efficiently the space that you have got and the finances that you have got. So the professionals will enable you to come up with an efficient building where space use has been optimized, the building is safe and stable, and the building is livable, it is habitable. It's not the kind of building that you get into and you feel like you're suffocating. You feel like you are in the dark or the windows are too far away. So that's the kind of role that the professional will play in your project. And by doing that and by their training, they ensure that you are getting the best value for your finances and for your space. Engineers are some of the professionals that a developer or somebody who wants to build would use in their work. There are a number of things that I have already mentioned. One is efficient use of space. And there will be somebody, a professional who is called an architect, who will look at the kind of land you have, the shape, and advise you best on how you can put your building on it in the best way possible so that you have got efficient use of space. It allows for areas of circulation. It allows for correct orientation of offices and such. It allows for proper location of washrooms, for example. So that is what the architect does. So the architect will ensure that the space is properly allocated, and he'll also have a vision of what the building or the space in the building will look like at the end. The architect is concerned about the aesthetics and the space. Then after the architect has come up with a concept, they work with the other professionals, in this case the engineers, where there is the structural engineer who will be in charge of ensuring that the building is stable and it is safe, it is safely constructed to ensure that it is being built on good ground, a stable ground, to ensure that it does not negatively affect other buildings in the neighbors' plots, for example. Then there is the services engineer where services here means things electrical, things plumbing, flowing water, flowing air if you're using AC, and they will advise you on the best way you can achieve the lighting you require, the plumbing that you require, in the most economical way. In electrical matters, for example, you might just decide to overlook the input of a professional engineer, but then the end result will be that that person you have used who is not a professional engineer is probably the electrical technician or any other person who can put wires in the walls. What will happen is you'll end up with too many wires and meters of wires, rolls of wires that you actually do not need. When you get to start using your building, you might realize that although you have the same number of lighting points, you will find that your bill always is higher than the bill being paid by somebody else who has the same number of lighting points, but had the wires installed in an efficient manner. You end up with losses. You pay for electricity that disappears in the wall. For plumbing, you might have a toilet, it flashes, it produces the sound of flashing, but it's not doing the job. The pressure is not enough. So you find you are in a building or a house, toilets are nicely done, the tiling, but the flushing system is not working. So you get into the washroom and the first thing you see is a bucket with water. And there's water in the system, only that it doesn't work. Now, those are oversights that would not be there if you engaged a professional engineer. You may also want to make use of green energy, things like solar lighting. Maybe you have got wind power. The professional engineer will help you to optimize how best you can combine the available green energy that you have so that the costs of running your building will be a lot lower. Then there is the quantity surveyor who basically after all these designs are put together, they put a cost to it. They are conscious of the economic environment and the parameters that cause changes in prices. So they'll be able to advise you as the developer on the cost. And they'll also assist in the management of the contract, because contracts have got clauses that penalize and reward. So basically that's what a quantity surveyor does. I also forgot to mention about the lifts, buildings that have got lifts and escalators. That's the area for the services engineers, the electrical engineer and the mechanical engineer. The other professionals that you will need if you have a project that is a bit bigger, you need a project manager who can coordinate the several aspects of the design and the construction. There's projects, in fact, all projects according to the National Environmental Management Authority require to be tested, and it's ensured that they're not going to harm the environment adversely. So all projects will be required to also get approval from NEMA, and not anyone can walk to NEMA and get that approval. You need to engage approved professionals, professionals who are approved by NEMA. They understand the environment, they understand the effects, and they'll help you go through the process and get approval from NEMA. In very large projects, there are also social impacts, and these at the moment are overseen also by NEMA. So those same professionals that help you look at how your project is affecting the environment will look at also how it affects the community. I'll emphasize again the role of the structural engineer or the civil engineer. Basically, what they will look at even before you start building, they look at the ground on which you want to build. They will test the soil and advise you on how to start off your construction in such a way that the whole building is going to be stable and safe. So they will investigate what kind of ground, how deep is the rock where you want to build. And even if they find rock, they'll not assume that it's all rock all the way down. Normally in the investigation, they'll ensure that it is really rock that you can build on. If it is rock you cannot build on, you'll be advised so. And you might find that the engineer is advising that as you excavate your foundations, you go much deeper than you had expected. Or that you don't need to even go deeper because they find that whatever you want to build on is competent. So that is one of the roles that the structural engineer will undertake. And then whatever design the architect has come up with in the case of buildings, the role of the structural engineer is to ensure that this structure can stand safely over the next 50, 100 years without collapsing. This is really important because, as you have mentioned, structural collapses are catastrophic and they kill people. So it is not a matter to be overlooked. You have to ensure, or the engineer has to ensure that the structure is sound and that it is going to withstand the rigors of the environment. They might be tall structures, so there are some times when there is strong wind and the building tends to vibrate and such. There may be earthquakes, which basically is the shaking of the ground. That is what an earthquake is. Now, the structural engineer will ensure that there is adequate provision in the course of construction for this building to be able to resist damage due to this shaking of the ground. The other thing is, which may cause a building to be condemned structurally, is when you find a building that, or parts of the building, are vibrating excessively. Excessively here means they vibrate such that they're within the feeling threshold. You can feel it as an occupant of the building. Maybe you are seated somewhere in your lounge, just one child or two children are jumping up and down, and you can feel your knees becoming jelly. Yeah. Now, that is excessive vibration, which should not happen if you engage a professional engineer. Or you could feel some sway, and that is not what's supposed to happen. Those sways, those vibrations should all be so small that we should not be able to feel them as humans. Then there is, I've discussed about the foundations under your own building, but in urban areas, you will find tall buildings, and you could either be the first one to come up with a tall building in your neighborhood or the last one. So the structural engineer or the civil engineer who is competent in geotechnical matters of the soil and earth, they will check and advise if any protection is required against work from your future neighbor or against affecting work that has been done by your neighbor before you did yours. So there are measures that the engineer would recommend to ensure that when you are excavating in your plot, you are not adversely affecting the structure in your neighbor's plot. That is extremely important, and because otherwise they might come with the liabilities, because even though you are working in your own plot, but you should be careful not to disturb the property that belongs to your neighbor. So that is a requirement, and the engineers will be able to advise you on that. Now, in cases where such have not been taken care of, you've heard that buildings are tilting because the foundations are giving in, or the soil on which it is standing is giving in. And when it tilts, you know, if it's a building that is meant to be upright, when it starts tilting, it starts getting weak. It ends up falling over, or it cracks and eventually collapses. Another issue is wrong design. If you don't use a professional engineer, you'll end up having a design which is inadequate, but also expensive, because one, maybe the reinforcement steel that you put in your concrete has been put in the wrong place. It's a lot of reinforcement, but it's all in the wrong place, or where it really matters that it should be, it's not there. So your building collapses anyway. So you end up, you'll have lost in the amount of materials you put in, and lost because you probably have to build again. So basically, that is what it is about professional design role, ensuring that structures don't collapse. The other thing is you might find that the drawings, the designs are all well done, but when it comes to supervision, the construction, you might find a developer getting rid of the professionals, and they think they can supervise it on their own. So they end up getting somebody who, one, may not be understanding the drawings, or understands the drawing, but because they are not involved in the design, might start making changes that they should really not be making. Or the materials being allowed in the construction are of poor quality. The workmanship of the contractor or the labor foreman or whoever it is also not up to scratch. So they end up, the drawings are good, the design is good, but there's a problem. So those are things that you need to be very careful to avoid. Then there are some provisions in the design that you are required to have as you build. You know, things like expansion joints and things like those. You know, things that really ensure that your building is stable and well done. You find that some of them are overlooked. You find buildings that have no expansion joints. Boundary walls, what everybody thinks are very easy, straightforward to build. A lot of them fail because foundations are not checked properly. Expansion joints are not allowed. So what people think is the simplest structure fails very many times. And when it fails, just get a fundi, take them back, they do the same thing, and it fails again. So it gets very expensive, and that's why it's important to make use of professional engineers. I'll just mention a few telltale signs. And one would be, if the building is supposed to be upright, and then you get to see some unusual tilting, it's out of plan basically, then you need to be cautious there, because if that is not what it was intended to be, then there could be a problem. The second telltale sign is cracks, and these are the most noticeable most of the time to anyone. If you notice cracks, you need to get advice, ask, and find out why those cracks are there. Don't overlook cracks. Cracks is the way the building communicates to us when there's a problem, because they are not meant to be there. So when you see cracks, please seek the advice of a professional, and hopefully you'll be able to get to the bottom of the matter. Another thing that you might notice, if you have a soffit, maybe a first floor or something, and you expect that it's all in the same level, but you notice that it is sagging, it is bowing downwards, then something could be wrong. Because if it's meant to be level, it works best when it is level, but when it is sagging, it means that either it has been overloaded before, or it's already overloaded. So again, I would advise that get professional opinion, get an engineer to advise you on what the cause could be. The other one that I should mention is the issue of vibrations. You get into a building, or and then you can feel that there's a bit of vibration in the building. It could be a sign that the structure has not been designed and constructed properly. So these are telltale signs, and they point to either use of bad materials, poor workmanship, or poor design provisions. So these are things that can be checked by a professional engineer, and they'll be able to advise you accordingly. Now, what if you are not involved in the construction? You are buying off the plan, or you just been told there's a block of flats somewhere, go and buy. My advice is, if you're buying something that's already completed, is first make time to go and see it. Take your time to walk around, to walk through it and feel. Once you have seen that, you need to ask for an occupation certificate. This is a certificate that is issued by the local authorities once the construction is completed and it is ready for occupation. Then you could also ask for a structural completion report. This is the report that is compiled by the engineer who supervised the building. And in this report, he'll mention if there are any areas that are suspected to have been built incorrectly. It will be obvious from the report. If the structure is sound, the report will also state so, that all the design provisions have been provided. All the quality control steps were taken, and the results indicate that the contractor did a good job. Now, the other thing, you know, there are defects that are not obvious the first time you occupy premises. What I would say that you should do is, in the sale agreement, first please read the sale agreements. There's a lot of standard sale agreements, but read through it and determine how the issue of defects that might come up later will be addressed. You can, for example, include a clause that covers for any defects that come up in the next, say, 1 year or the next 7, 8 months, such that if that happens, then the developer or the person who is selling can avail the professionals he worked with, or the contractor, or both, at least to attend to that defect. So that, I think, for buyers, I think that is key, that they should have that clause in the agreement. That way, they get the benefit of the professionals attending to these issues before they get out of hand. I dwelt quite a bit on the structural engineer's bit, but I want to mention that there's also adjoining infrastructure in the building, access roads to the buildings, parkings, how foul water is being taken away from the building. All that is taken care of by the civil engineer. You could have two separate people doing that, but generally the civil engineer should be able to advise you on that. So they'll ensure that when it rains, there is no flooding around the building, there is no water going into the building. So they'll advise you at what level your building is supposed to be. Most of these areas you see where there is a lot of inundation, flooding, and you find water has gone up to the window sill level. Should not really happen if the developer consulted a professional engineer who would then have advised, in this area, this is the flood level, stay above the flood level. Your access road will stay above the flood level. That way then you don't incur losses when there is an abnormal heavy rain. So the parking lots are draining well. The sewer from the buildings are collected, either treated and the water used for other things, or properly connected to the main sewer that belongs to the local authorities, so that it is taken to a treatment plant. On services, when you have a building that has got lifts and escalators, say you have got a building that has 3 or 4 wings, and you've got a number of lifts, how do you get the lifts to work? Do you just press on one of them and all of them will turn up? Or those things that are matters that the electrical engineer, the services engineer will advise you about. The kind of air you have when you are in the lift, matters of fire escape areas or assembly areas. There are so many things that these professionals will have to look at and advise you accordingly. So please, my final call is, we would request you, as you build, consult the professionals in the industry and get the best out of your investment.